All right, I'm a little surprised we didn't get to this one sooner, but it's time for another 2025 college football schedule preview. And up today, the Ohio State Buckeyes. Shout out to the Ohio State Buckeye fans. I don't know if y'all know this or not, but y'all won the national title last year. The reason I'm asking is because it seems like y'all are spending more time defending yourselves against getting beat by Michigan for the fourth year in a row than you are celebrating the fact that you won the national title. But Ohio State, great team last year, no doubt about it. They were the best team in the country at the end of the year. And with the new expanded playoffs and the ability to make the playoffs with a couple of losses, that's going to become more important, I think, than necessarily being like the best team from start to finish. Clearly, Ohio State, I don't think, was the best team in the country for portions of the season, but that doesn't matter anymore. They got into the playoffs with the 2 losses, and they put it into another gear in the playoffs, and there just wasn't a team that was going to beat them as long as they were playing that way. It started with the domination of Tennessee, then Oregon, and of course culminated with winning the national title against Notre Dame. Just an unbelievable team last year for Ohio State. One of the most talented teams on paper, maybe, that we've ever seen. The talent that they were able to accumulate over there last year was just mind-boggling. Now, a lot of that comes back. A lot of it is leaving. We're going to take a look at their schedule today and go through it. This is not a prediction video for next year. I get around to my predictions usually around the end of May, beginning of June. You know, we still got spring practice going on, spring games coming up in April. There's another transfer portal window that opens at the end of April, beginning of May. So it's a little bit too early to start doing predictions, but part of what goes into a prediction is understanding the different teams' schedules, because the schedules are so different now, not just across conferences, but within the same conferences. So, of course, Ohio State won the Natty last year, 14-2. They did lose to Michigan. They did lose to Oregon in the regular season, but like I said, put it in another gear in the postseason. There was nobody that was beating that version of Ohio State last year that we saw in the postseason. So congratulations to them. But they do lose a lot of key pieces. Travion Henderson is gone. Emeka Egbuka is gone. Quarterback Will Howard is gone. They lose a lot off of what was one of the best defenses in the country last year. Cody Simon's gone. Jack Sawyer. JT Tiamualau. I don't know how to say his name. I'm not Scandinavian or whatever that is, but you know who I'm talking about. A couple of DBs, including Denzel Burke. But they get some pieces back, too. Of course, the 2 biggest, probably Jeremiah Smith on offense and Caleb Downs on defense. Ohio State might have the best offensive player in football in wide receiver Jeremiah Smith, and the best defensive player in football in safety Caleb Downs. Carnell Tate is back. And look, just because they lose all those pieces on defense, you guys know the story with teams like Ohio State that recruit at the level they do year in and year out. Just because somebody didn't start last year doesn't mean they didn't play a lot. Teams like Ohio State, with the depth that they have, they rotate players in and out. So, you know, they're losing a lot of those pieces on defense, but it's not going to be, you know, like people who've never played before in a lot of cases that are taking their place. It's going to be, players, very talented players, very highly rated and recruited players, and in a lot of cases, players that had a lot of playing experience last season. Ohio State's going to be ranked very high heading into the season for good reason, and we'll see if they can repeat as national champions. Let's take a look at their schedule, see what it looks like. That's an important piece of the puzzle. Now, last year, Ohio State had one of the easiest non-con schedules in the country. They played, I think, Western Michigan, Akron, and Marshall. This year, they host Texas in week 1. It's going to be a huge game. Anytime you get 2 huge brands together in the regular season, it's obviously must-see TV. So this is going to be a great game. Texas has to travel up to Columbus, so difficult non-con to start off the season. It feels like a playoff game in week 1. I don't mean, when I say it feels like a playoff game, the loser of this game is not eliminated from anything. I mean, Texas and Ohio State are both picked to make next year's playoffs by most people. And in the 12-team playoff, losing in week 1, no matter who you lose to, it's not an elimination game. So that's not what I mean when I say it feels like a playoff game. I mean, just a massive game, right? It's hard to find 2 bigger brands in the world of college football than Ohio State and Texas, especially right now. Both of those teams are playing really well. Texas has made the playoffs a couple of years in a row. Ohio State, of course, won the Natty last year. It's going to be a huge, huge game. Texas will have a brand new quarterback, too, and Arch Manning. Brand new in terms of he'll be the starter for the entire season. Of course, Arch Manning's been talked about for 3 or 4 years, going back to his recruitment out of high school, lands at Texas, has had some playing time there as Quinn Ewers has been injured a couple of times over the last few years, and they have inserted him in certain situations. So not necessarily a brand new quarterback, but a first-year starter there with Arch Manning. Now, Ohio State, of course, will have a first-year starter at quarterback, too. I guess most likely Julian Sayin would be my guess to get the start there at quarterback for Ohio State. But that's going to be a massive game in week 1. Obviously, a benefit for Ohio State to get that game at home. Week 2, Grambling State. Week 3, the Ohio Bobcats. So that's the Ohio State non-con schedule. So a good non-con schedule there, an improvement over last year for sure, when they didn't play any Power 4 opponents in the non-con this year, opening up with Texas. So they get their 3 non-con games out of the way, weeks 1, 2, and 3, and then they have their first bye week. Everybody gets 2 bye weeks again this season. So you play 3 non-con games, you have a bye week, and then you start your conference schedule. The Big Ten plays 9 conference games. West Coast game here at Washington. Washington, not a bad team last year, but definitely not what they were a couple of years ago where they made the playoffs under Kalen DeBoer. So they took a big step back last year entering the Big Ten, a little bit of an adjustment there. We'll see if they can improve some in 2025. A difficult trip having to travel all the way out to the West Coast. So we'll see what that means for Ohio State. But coming off a bye week, I mean, I don't know that it matters. I guess in terms of travel, to me, it seems like a benefit to have a bye week before you have to maybe travel out west like that. I don't know. Maybe we'll have to wait 4 or 5 years and see how these games kind of pan out. But Ohio State's a much better team than Washington. Again, this isn't a prediction video, but I would assume Ohio State would be a significant favorite in that game. Come back home, you take on Minnesota, and then on the road, back-to-back at Illinois and at Wisconsin. Now, Illinois was a pretty good team last year, finished in the top 15, beat South Carolina in a bowl game, and one of the better bowl games. Really, most all starters played for both teams in that game. That was a bowl game that felt like what bowl games used to be, didn't it? It seemed like both teams wanted to win. Both teams were happy to be there. It was a competitive game. You could tell both teams were trying. That was sort of what I miss about bowl season last year. I'm getting off on a tangent here, but the point is Illinois has had a couple of good seasons in the last 3 years, including last year where they finished in the top 15, and there's a lot of expectations for Illinois heading into this coming season. Maybe not expectations to compete for or win the Big Ten, but again, in the age of the 12-team playoff, you're going to have a handful of teams every year who maybe aren't normally title contenders, who are going to be considered as potential kind of bubble playoff teams. And I think Illinois falls into that category this year. You think of like the SMUs or the Indianas or the whoever from last year that sort of got into the playoffs. Illinois maybe thinks they could be one of those teams. So this is going to be a big game for them. And it's a home game for Illinois. So that could be a difficult game, a tricky game for Ohio State, the first of back-to-back road games before they travel to Camp Randall to take on the Wisconsin Badgers. And I've been disappointed in my boy, Luke Fickell. I did this a version of this video about Wisconsin a day or two ago. Their schedule is absolutely brutal. They play like Ohio State, Oregon, Michigan, and I forget, in Iowa. Four games in a row. Michigan, Oregon, Ohio State, Iowa. I can't remember the order, but Wisconsin has to play those 4 teams 4 weeks in a row without a bye week. It's just absolutely brutal. So other than the fact that this is the second leg of a back-to-back bye week, this would be a game I would expect Ohio State to win. You then have your second bye week. Again, I think this bye week comes at a good time, too, before one of the more difficult games on the schedule this year, Penn State. Penn State returns a ton, especially on offense. Drew Aller's back at quarterback. They get some running backs back. They got to replace some pieces on that defense, but I think you already know, Ohio State, man, Penn State got themselves a pretty good defensive coordinator. They were able to somehow lure Jim Knowles away from Ohio State. He's now at Penn State as the defensive coordinator. He replaces Tom Allen as defensive coordinator at Penn State, who took the defensive coordinator job at Clemson. So a lot of lateral moving going around there with the defensive coordinators. But this will be a big game. The pressure will be on Penn State, I think, in this game, even though it's a home game for Ohio State. This is just the game every year that you kind of go, well, Penn State's going to lose that one, you know? So I feel like more of the pressure will be on them in this game. But this game's been low scoring lately, particularly on the Penn State offensive side of the ball. We'll see if that continues. But anyway, one of the bigger games in the Big Ten every single year, Ohio State and Penn State on November 1st, a home game for Ohio State. Then you travel to what was last year one of the worst teams in the Power 4, Purdue, before a home game with UCLA. And you finish up the season with home games at Rutgers and a road game, of course, at Michigan, who has beat you 4 years in a row. You haven't beat them since 2019. You didn't play in COVID. They beat you in 21, 22, 23, and 24. Now, during that 4-year period, each of you have the one national title. And it has been fun to kind of watch the Michigan and Ohio State fans kind of argue back and forth on the internet, on Twitter, in my comment section, on the call-in shows, whatever. Ohio State won the Natty. They were the best team in the country. They got the trophy. But then Michigan man sitting over there going, yep, but you couldn't beat us again for the fourth year in a row. And there's the whole, we own Ryan Day thing that you have to hear from Michigan. This has, I was about to say this has become the biggest rivalry in college sports. You can make the argument that this is the biggest rivalry in college sports throughout history. And that might be true. In given years, maybe a rivalry game somewhere has been a bigger game than the Michigan-Ohio State, but not lately. The last 5 or 6 years, Michigan and Ohio State mostly have been ranked in the top 5 and the top 10 when this game is played at the end of the year. Now, that wasn't the case last year. Michigan was a pretty bad team, a 5-loss team. But that didn't matter. They went into Columbus and, smacked you around for 4 quarters and came out with the win. And now you got to go on the road and play them there. And they got a lot of momentum heading into the offseason, Michigan did. They weren't great last year. They didn't have a great team. Their offense was terrible. Their record wasn't very good. But they won their last 2 games of the year against Ohio State and then the bowl game against Alabama. So if they can use that as a springboard into 2025, of course, Bryce Underwood is coming in at quarterback. So they've heaped sky-high expectations on him. This will be a great game. A great game. I've picked Ohio State to win this game a lot. And I've been wrong a lot lately. So I have no idea which way I'll end up landing on that game right now in terms of predictions or whatever. It's obviously a benefit for Michigan that they play at home. I do think Ohio State's a better team, but I think you were a better team last year. You were definitely a better team 2 seasons ago. What that would have been 22? Yeah, 22, I guess. You were definitely a better team then. You still lost. That was the year the year you made the playoffs and lost to Georgia, I guess, whatever year that was. Anyway, they seem to have your number lately, but that is a huge game at the end of the year, every single year. One of the games of the year, not just in college, not just in the Big Ten, but in all of college football. Overall thoughts about the schedule in general. I like the big game at the beginning of the season as a college football fan. I mean, you probably notice already, Georgia's my favorite team, but I'm a massive college football fan. I'll watch almost any college football game. So just as a college football fan, I love seeing these games at the beginning of the year. Texas, Ohio State. It's going to be a great game. You follow that up with a couple of lower classification schools. Nothing wrong with that. It's a pretty typical non-con schedule there for most teams across the country. In terms of road games, at Washington, other than the travel, not all that difficult, I don't think. At Illinois, I think will be a challenge. At Wisconsin, extremely disappointing to me. Wisconsin has been under Luke Fickell. I mentioned this the other day. From 1996 to 2001, a 26-year period, 26 seasons. There was only 3 times in those 26 seasons from 96 to 2021, whatever, where Michigan won 7 games or less. Only 3 times did they win 7 games or less. They have currently won 7 games or less the last 3 seasons, 3 years in a row. It has not worked out so far for Luke Fickell. But back-to-back road games can be tricky. You also have the road games in back half or back third of the season at Purdue, which shouldn't be too difficult. And then, of course, the massive game at the end at Michigan. Trap games, maybe the Minnesota game, but that's at home. You play 3 road games in a 4-week period there in between your bye weeks. You're at Washington, at Illinois, at Wisconsin. Illinois looks to be the best team of that bunch. So if you're looking for a trap game on this schedule, does Ohio State get caught napping at home against Minnesota after a long flight back from Washington? I doubt it. I think they're probably too well coached for that. But if you're trying to pinpoint a potential trap game, that or maybe the Rutgers game, just because it comes before the Michigan game, but both of those are home games, which will help. So I don't necessarily see that much potential for a trap game here on this schedule, at least in my opinion. I think this is I don't know if favorable is the right word. I don't know that there's any such thing as a favorable schedule in the Big Ten or the SEC. There are so many potential landmines out there in both conferences. But I have definitely seen schedules that are more difficult than this. I've seen some that are probably a little easier. I mean, you do have to play at Illinois. You do have to play Penn State. Those are both top 15 teams. In the case of Penn State, top 5-ish, top 10-ish. At Michigan, jury kind of out on them. They did finish the season strong. I think it's going to come down to Bryce Underwood, right? Is Michigan going to be a top 10, top 15 team competing for a playoff spot? If they are, it's because Bryce Underwood has a great season. If he sort of has your typical sort of freshman mistake, learn as you go type of season, then it's possible Michigan finds themselves on the outside looking into that 12-team playoff again. So I've seen some harder schedules in the Big Ten. I've seen some easier ones. I think this is a schedule that Ohio State should be able to manage and find themselves in the playoffs again in 2025. Anyway, let me know what you think down below about Ohio State's schedule and their chances in 2025. I appreciate you watching, and have a good morning.